This is Agriculture Today. I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network. Ahead of us today on this Monday's programming, we start with our weekly cattle market update, which is provided by Oklahoma State University livestock economist Derrell Peel. He provides insight on the latest cattle on feed report and the much-anticipated semi-annual cattle inventory report. We also have with us K-State beef veterinarian AJ Tarpoff. He joins us to share a reminder on the importance of diversifying fly control methods this time of year, as well as being on the lookout for pink eye within herds on pasture. We end with this week's wildlife segment on aquatic bugs with K-State fisheries and aquatic specialist Joe Gerken. That and more awaits us ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our weekly cattle market update. And to do that, we have this week with us Derrell Peel. He is a livestock economist from Oklahoma State University. So, Derrell, thanks for joining us.
You bet. Happy to be here.
Absolutely. So let's go ahead and start off with the summary of kind of what we've seen in the past week behind us. What did the markets really show?
You know, at least in Oklahoma, these markets are beginning to show some real impacts of the drought situation, which is advancing very rapidly. We've seen our feeder cattle markets pull back a little bit at the auctions in Oklahoma, and in particular the cull cow market, which has been very, very strong this year, despite the fact that we've had elevated slaughter numbers. But it's really come under pressure. Now, again, that may be a little bit more of a regional thing from Oklahoma south through Texas. The drought conditions have really advanced sharply, and we're seeing that now in movement of cattle through these auctions.
Oklahoma and Texas aren't alone. We're continuing to see ongoing drought here in Kansas as well, but it's kind of been crazy to see the effects of that, not only on livestock, but then in our grain markets as well. So it'll be unfortunate to see how those two interact as this drought continues on.
Well, I tell you, this drought has continued to advance, and you're absolutely right. The drought, the seriousness of the drought across Kansas and Nebraska continues to advance as well, and it's moved up into the Midwest, where it becomes, from a cattle perspective, it's been mostly a hay and pasture thing up to this point, but it's very likely going to start being more of a crop market impact, which obviously then affects feed markets from a livestock perspective. So all of these things are facing us in the coming weeks.
We've gotten kind of lucky this week, being that we've got a few updates in terms of some of the reports that have come out. So the first one being that monthly cattle on feed report that we get once again regularly every single month. So what has that really shown?
The July cattle on feed report showed that placements in June were about as expected, down 2.4% compared to last year. Marketings in June were up 2% as expected. The report was very well anticipated, I think, in terms of the pre-report estimates. On July 1, that gives us an on-feed total just a little bit above year ago of 100.4% of last year. Now, the one thing I would say, and this is the second month in a row we've seen this very pronounced, even though placements were down 2.4% in total, if you look at the weight breakdowns, placements of cattle under 700 pounds were up 4.1%. And we saw the same thing last month with the lightweight placements higher, even though the overall number was lower. Placements of cattle greater than 700 pounds were down 6.1%, hence the net reduction in placement. So once again, we see that, we're basically pulling cattle ahead. We're placing them at lighter weights in the feedlots. That's what's available now, but that means you can place them now or you can place them later, but you can't do both. And so we're going to see these cattle numbers get a lot tighter here at some point. We've been kind of defying gravity and pushing off the time period when we have to face that reality, but it's coming in terms of the kind of hole in cattle numbers we're going to see at some point here in the next few months.
Sure, and that was going to be my next question is, what do you anticipate that timeline being like? Is it going to be a short-term thing where it's the next few months are going to be difficult, or could this be a long-term problem that over time adds up?
Well, again, we've really been doing this for several months, and frankly, it's taken longer to sort of turn the corner, if you will, in terms of these feedlot numbers coming down to sort of reflect what's happening in the rest of the country or out in the country. And so, once again, we're doing it now. The last 2 months, we've had placements down year over year, but down a modest 2% about in both months. So we're not doing it very fast, and I think that will accelerate at some point. Again, that hole in feeder cattle supplies is going to become more apparent. I expect it really any time in the next couple of months. It always seems to take longer than I think, but we will get there sooner rather than later.
Sure. And in terms of that other report that I mentioned that we were lucky that we had several to cover, this one's really the big one, this next one we're going to cover, and it's the mid-year cattle inventory report. And I know this one has been highly anticipated, so let's go ahead and cover that one.
You bet. The July cattle inventory report gives us a national snapshot of the overall industry. So, kind of from the top down, all cattle and calves were down 2% from a year ago. Beef cows were down a full 3%. And, we were anticipating a fairly sharp drop. This actually probably came in a little bit bigger than some people expected. So down a full 3% on beef cows. Beef replacement heifers down 3.5%. So what that says is that from the beef side of the industry here, we don't have as many cows, and we don't have the heifers to make more cows. And at this point in time, the female slaughter continues at a fairly rapid rate. Other numbers in the report: dairy cows were just slightly down 0.5% from a year ago. Dairy replacement heifers were down. They were down more sharply, about 6.2%. And the number of steers over 500 pounds, other heifers, and the calves, if you put them together in terms of the feeder supply, add all those up and subtract off the ones that are already in the feedlot, the overall feeder supply was down. I don't have a percentage right in front of me, but it was down in that 2 to 2.5% range. So, again, we have less cattle in the country. The feedlot numbers were just about even with a year ago in terms of the full U.S. number that comes out in this cattle inventory report. So we've been able to hold those feedlot inventories up to this point, but we will not be able to do it indefinitely.
Quite a few interesting dynamics there at play, and especially you talked about the sharp decline of replacement heifers and then, just cow-calf operations, the numbers there. And that reinforces the liquidation of the herd that we've been talking about for the past several weeks now, really, on this segment.
That's exactly right. And really, it's the cumulative effect, and I think it is a cumulative effect of the drought conditions that we've had, some of it going back a full 2 years. We had a lot of drought last year in some regions of the country. Some of those regions, the northern plains, for example, North Dakota is in substantially better shape this year compared to a year ago. But the drought is much more severe in the central and southern plains this year compared to a year ago. So the drought's kind of moved around the last 2 or 3 years, but we have had continuing drought. And I think the cumulative effect here is that we're making this industry smaller than we intended to, than we would like to. But Mother Nature is calling the shots here, and, there will be long-term repercussions here because, at some point we probably will see relief, hopefully, from these drought conditions. But when that happens, it's going to take a substantial amount of time to rebuild this industry from the levels we're going to find ourselves.
Sure. I mean, history always seems to repeat itself, and we've seen things like this happen in the industry before, but it's concerning just with everything else going on in the world right now to see this occurring. I know we mostly focus on beef cattle when it comes to the cattle market report in terms of what we're talking about, but the dairy cattle numbers that you talked about were interesting to hear as well, because those replacement heifer numbers taking a sharp dive, that's kind of concern. What can the long-term effects of that really be? Are we seeing those play out now?
The dairy industry has been kind of up and down. We had some better prices. I think they're weakening a little bit now. I don't follow it as close, to be honest with you. But, the heifer number is a little surprising. Honestly, I'm not quite sure I know what to make of it, but the implication is simply that, we're not going to be trying to rebuild the herd, maybe even not trying to hold the herd level at the levels that we've seen the dairy cow inventory. So, yeah, it's there are some interesting dynamics, and obviously what the dairy industry does for its own economic reasons, if you will, driven by dairy product markets, but it has an implication on the beef side as well.
Well, I know that we've talked through a lot, but in terms of some major takeaways for listeners that we've covered today, what should people really know as they're walking away from listening to our program?
Well, again, I think we're talking about the immediate effects. We're trying to get a handle on just where this drought is going to take us. It's midsummer, and we've had extremely high temperatures. We're seeing a lot of immediate reaction, but I think it's also important to keep in mind what those long-term impacts are. It looks to me like we're not carrying over very many replacement heifers into next year. So let's say that things change and next year drought is not really an issue. What can the industry do? it's going to be difficult to do more than about stabilize the numbers in the first year. It'll take another year to rebuild enough replacement heifers to start really rebuilding the herd. So we're probably talking about things that are going to impact this industry for the next 3 to 5 years.
Wow, well, significant for sure when you think about it. I feel like the beef industry, we know how long, especially in terms of life cycles and reproductive cycles of these animals, how long it takes to rebuild. But you have to adjust at some point when it comes to all the different factors coming in, like that drought that we talked about.
Yeah, again, for folks that remember, and many of us painfully remember the drought in 2011, 2012, into 2013, and where that took us, it forced us lower than we intended to be in terms of cattle numbers. And, then you remember what the market reaction was with prices at historically high levels in 2014 and 2015. I think you can look to that time period as kind of what we're looking at here. Probably, again, in the next 3 to 5 years, we're gonna liquidate down to some level. We don't know where that stops at this point. And then when we try to rebuild and, really restrict those feeder supplies from smaller numbers and more heifers being held, then we're going to see pretty pronounced market reactions, I think, at some point in the future.
Sure. It makes you think if there's anything that we could have learned from that first time around, any tidbits of information for producers to hold on to. But it'll be interesting to see how it plays out for sure.
It will. And, if we learned anything from the last time is that we're kind of anticipating that this is going to push our general trend for cattle prices. At some point, they'll probably spike sharply higher. But we also learned the last time that the backside of this thing is pretty dramatic as well. That prices will go up. They will generate a reaction to try to rebuild the herd. But then on the backside, they came down pretty fast as well. So I think we need to learn the lessons from the last time to sort of know what to anticipate this time.
A lot of volatility for sure. Well, Derrell, thank you so much for your time this afternoon and breaking down these markets with us.
You bet. I look forward to visiting with you again.
Absolutely, as do we. Once again, that was Derrell Peel. He's a livestock economist out of Oklahoma State University, joining us for this week's cattle market update. We'll be back with more ahead on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now with AJ Tarpoff. He is a K-State beef veterinarian. And today we're going to be covering a few subjects, but some pertinent ones, being that this is an issue we talked about earlier in the year, but it's something we should still keep in mind now, and that's fly control.
Yeah, fly control. It's it's an interesting time of year. Usually we implement our initial fly control issues, and when I talk about cattle flies, pasture-based operations, we're really concerned about horn flies. They're the blood-feeding parasite that we find on the backs of cattle. Go out during the heat of the day, and we'll see those flies up over the withers during the really peak heat. Large amount of sun, they'll actually come up underneath the belly. But they're voracious blood feeders, and they really cause a big production loss in our cow herds. So those horn flies are what really we battle most. And usually early season, we might use insecticide-impregnated ear tags, might use different types of pour-ons or things like that just prior to turnout. But here we are several months later. Even some of our best insecticide ear tags really only have duration of efficacy for 5 months. Right? If we're lucky. Mm-hmm. Well, if you put them in April, we're about due that they're going to lose efficacy. So right now we have another big population pop, so to speak, of horn flies. We have the prime conditions. We've been out in those pastures for several months. Well, now it's time to shake it up if we're going to control these parasites and decrease the impact that they're having on our herds. So right now it's, I think, the most important piece at this period of time. If you're going in for, let's say, if you're going to have pregnancy check, you're going to have your vet out and do a preg check. That's a prime time. Remove those ear tags. Okay, the ear tags that you put in April or May, time to remove them, and we're going to switch it up. The reason why we want to remove those ear tags is the amount of insecticide never actually goes away. It decreases the amount, but it's still inside that tag. And once we no longer have efficacy, the issue that we run into is we have a sublethal dose of that insecticide that is exposing all of those flies. So that means we are breeding resistance. So in order to curb that resistance, we need to remove that ear tag, and we might switch things up. When we do that, usually we're going for sprays, pour-ons, spot-ons. We're gonna switch up the method, but also the class of insecticide. So the three main classes of insecticides that we have at our disposal are pyrethrins, organophosphate, and then the macrocytic lactones. Okay. Now, whatever fly tag you might have used early season, so say you had a pyrethrin ear tag. Well, right now, we cut that ear tag out. We probably have some pyrethrin resistance floating through that. So if we're going to come back with a spray, we actually do need to switch in product class, the insecticide class, to probably an organophosphate or macrocytic lactone. And that really will reduce the population. We can zap that population before they go dormant this upcoming winter. So that fly control, very important, but we do have a little bit of labor involved to be able to remove those ear tags, switch up the method, switch up the class before we go into the next dormant season.
Sure. So making the most of time that you've already got cattle going through a chute, why not kill two birds with one stone, so to speak?
Absolutely. If the more times that we can maximize that, kind of the efficiency of our labor, the better. So plan ahead. Make sure that if you are going to have animals coming through the chute, to be prepared for some of those, be able to apply those treatments. You get a good assessment of those animals. See if there are any ticks on those animals if you're running into some of those issues. So now is kind of that prime time. Some operations may not use ear tags. Hey, how do we treat these animals out in the pasture? ATV sprayers, being able to put out a little bit of cubes or something like that. A lot of producers out there have kind of trained their animals to get used to that, the motor on the tank sprayer, to be able to properly apply, get good coverage on those animals, even in a pasture setting.
Absolutely. And you mentioned this, but it's not enough just to change methods. You have to make sure you're changing really what the product is in and of itself, the type of insecticide. The
insecticide class is very important. And if you ever have questions on what those insecticide classes or what these products are, you have a great resource locally, and that's your local veterinarian. They'll be able to help walk you through what those insecticides are, what class they are, and help you with product selection for this late season treatment.
Absolutely. And I mentioned we're going to cover quite a few topics today, but that next topic, kind of related, is pink eye.
Pink eye, it's a year in and year out issue that a lot of our producers battle. Unfortunately, right now, this is essentially pink eye season. And there's a really important reason why that is. Well, if you have grass growing in your pasture right now, which I know is a luxury in some areas of the state, we're getting a lot of seed heads right now. So as the seed heads start to emerge from some of our, our prairie pastures, again, that opportunity of abrasion. The bugs, the bacteria that cause pink eye are naturally found around the eye that are carried in our herd. They're not foreign invaders, and they're kind of normal inhabitants until we have a breakdown in that protective barrier. And that's where the immune system really, thrives. But unfortunately, when we get taller brush, taller grass, we get seed heads, we have hot summer days, cattle are piling into more wooded or pretty woolly areas, they have an opportunity to scratch their cornea, scratch their eye. And that scratch is just enough to allow those bacteria to really attach and then replicate rapidly, leading to pink eye. So keep a keen eye on, hey, it's pink eye season. Are you prepared? When you see some of these issues, keeping a close eye on those animals to make sure that they recover as quickly as possible. Early treatment is absolutely necessary. Keep an eye if there are grass seeds that are stuck in the eye, we can flush those out. So before you just treat them and send them on their way, have a good look at the eye. Make sure there's nothing stuck underneath that eyelid. Do absolutely recommend eye patches. So especially right now, we're all pretty well versed with the hot summer sun, but also the breeze, maybe a little bit of dust. All of those are irritants to the eye, and especially if we already have a damaged eye, anything that we can do to protect that eye during healing process is really important. So the eye patches, we can glue them on with some tag glue, give the relief from the solar radiation, from dust, from wind. They heal a lot better, and it's a good pain relief for those animals as well. Other treatments, obviously, it's systemic antibiotics. Systemic antibiotics really helps clear those up, and that's where working with your local veterinarian on product selection is very important, because we do have a lot of options when it comes to treating pink eye effectively. So every operation is a little bit different. Work with your local vet, have products on hand, have those eye patches on hand, the tag glue, be prepared to be able to handle those animals, capture them and restrain them in a working facility, and be able to apply that treatment.
Sure, it makes my eye just itch thinking about pink eye, because it's just such an uncomfortable thing for these animals to have to deal with. And I recently spoke with Ron Graber about water quality in livestock, and one of his biggest tips was, you need to be checking your livestock fairly frequently with how hot and what time of year it really is right now with all of these issues that can be going on. And pink eye is one of those things you really should be looking out for.
Pink eye, it's our typical pasture issues.
Yeah.
If there's grass and there's water, cattle should be okay. Well, yes, that's true to an extent. We still need to check those animals very regularly. Get out there, get the animals up, get them moving, see their locomotion, because we can still see pink eye, but also foot rot, right? If we don't get those animals up and we're able to see them in locomotion, we may miss some of these issues that we could treat them and have a really good successful treatment and get them healing immediately. However, if we don't get that good assessment, see both sides of the animals, and actually see them in motion, we may miss some of these things out in those pastures. So it takes a little extra time, but thankfully we can train our herds. We go out there, and if we train them and use some of our stockmanship skills to get them up, get them moving, they like that repetition. And those animals they thrive off of that. So as soon as you start unlocking the gate, sometimes their heads come up and they start running towards the gate to figure out what's going on. Many times we get in the habit of, hey, I just need to go out and put out mineral. Well, putting out mineral, and since we're already there, we can still kill two birds with one stone, get a good assessment on those animals every day.
Absolutely. Creatures of habit, just like us, I would say.
Absolutely.
In terms of a lot of things. But AJ, if people are listening, our local veterinarians are always our best first step when it comes to dealing with some of these issues. But if listeners are tuning in and they're wanting more information on these subjects, where can they find some of that?
There's more information on most of these subjects, on fly control, on foot rot, pink eye, through our ksubeef.org website. ksubeef.org is our beef extension website. There is a link on the right-hand corner for Beef Tips. And Beef Tips is our bi-monthly newsletter that we have some phenomenal resources and articles that have been written over time. It's searchable. You can type in a keyword, and those articles will pop right up. So whether it's fly control, parasites, pink eye, type in some of those keywords and be able to pull that right up in Beef Tips.
Excellent. Well, as always, that will be linked in the show notes of today's episode, which can be found on agtoday.net. But AJ, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you.
Once again, that was AJ Tarpoff. He is our K-State beef veterinarian. He covered for us fly control and pink eye. Before we cut to a quick break, a quick look at the programs to come in the week ahead. Tomorrow, we continue our focus this month of July on water with Chief Engineer and Head of the Division of Water Resources for the Kansas Department of Agriculture, Earl Lewis. This week, we will also be visiting with Lavelle Windsor. She is a K-State Farm financial analyst, and she will be sharing with us information about the Kansas Women in Ag program, spearheaded by both her and Robin Reed. Also to look forward to, K-State Beef Extension Specialist Sandy Johnson will be speaking with us about reproductive technologies, and the upcoming Applied Reproductive Strategies in Beef Cattle Workshop in San Antonio, Texas. We have all of that and more to look forward to in the week ahead, but we'll be back with more here shortly on Agriculture Today. This is Agriculture Today. We are back now for our wildlife segment for the week, and to do that, we have with us Joe Gerken. He is our aquatics and fisheries specialist here at K-State, and today we're going to be talking about aquatic bugs.
Yeah, so there's a lot of bugs that live in ponds and streams. My wife is an entomologist. She studies bugs. She said that it would be a great topic, and I told her I would give her a shout-out on such a great topic. So here we are. Don't cut that out, Samantha.
Awesome. Wives are always right.
That's right.
That's a good lesson to start off on. But we're really going to be talking about these bugs because their life cycle is partially in water.
Yeah, so a lot of bugs, there are some bugs that complete their entire lives in water, but a lot of bugs that we see flying around actually live in the water to start their lives. And so good examples of that are dragonflies. Dragonflies have their larvae grow up in the water, and then they emerge into a terrestrial form later in life. So we see them flying around on land, but they grew up in the water. Mosquitoes are a really common one, so I'm sure people aren't quite as excited about mosquitoes as they are about dragonflies, but they're really important for the ponds or the streams. They provide a lot of benefits, food, for example, nutrient cycling. So bugs are really important, even though they're not the first thing we think of when we're thinking about a pond.
You've mentioned that they're also good indicators of water quality, so another key importance of them.
Yep, so there is a group that we call ETP. It's Ephemeroptera, Trichoptera, and Plecoptera, really big fancy words that are basically 3 different types of macroinvertebrates. So we can go out and sample. We can look in a stream and see kind of how many different types of those insects are in the stream, how prevalent they are. And that'll give us kind of an indication of the water quality. So they're really susceptible to water quality. If we're not seeing a lot of invertebrates in our pond, that might be something to consider. Maybe that's an indicator of something else going on in the water.
You mentioned that they play a key role in acting as a food source, too. So specifically for fish, this is important.
Yep. So a lot of people are concerned about fish. We don't necessarily care about the bugs, but without the bugs, we don't have fish. Lots of different things. Really small fish, larval-sized fish are feeding on zooplankton. So they're one of the first things that they're eating. They're eating phytoplankton, which are like little plants that float around. And shortly after that, they switch over and start feeding on little tiny bugs. And so those zooplankton are really important. When you start getting up to a little bit bigger fish, a lot of panfish, for example, bream are eating, or perch as we call them a lot in Kansas, they're eating a lot of bugs. They're going up to plants and picking them off and eating them. So they're really beneficial there for the fish and helping them grow. So I'd recommend you go kind of look in your pond and see what kind of bugs you might have in your pond.
So really what you're describing here is like a cascading effect, really, in terms of the importance of maintaining these bug populations to maintain the overall quality.
Right. And so one of the things that I really want to focus on, or mention at least, is that when we are treating our ponds for plants, for example, we need to kind of think about what other organisms it might be impacting. So a good example there would be dyeing our pond. A lot of people add dye to their pond to cut down on plants. But if you cut down on plants, you cut down on bugs. If you cut down on bugs, we just talked about that's an important food source. And so you might have issues with your fish growing and being where they need to be. This time of year, a lot of people are treating their plants just to kind of think about what kind of effect that might have on the fish or other organisms in the pond that we're concerned about.
In terms of helping maintain those healthy bug populations, what are some things that people can keep in mind other than maintaining their plants?
Overall water quality. So let's make sure that we have good cycling, good oxygenation. We want to make sure our water is kind of mixed up. It's not just sitting there stagnant and getting all yucky. Plants get broken down by bugs. We want to make sure there's some things for the bugs to eat, but not too much. Keeping the water moving is really beneficial. Overall, just having a good pond is really beneficial to the bugs. It kind of all feeds off everything. So if something starts getting out of balance, we see too many fish or too many plants, we would want to do something about that. The bugs are going to be kind of our first indication.
In terms of resources for more information on maintaining overall pond quality, including these bugs, Where can people find that?
Always reach out to your local extension agent. They are great resources there. KSRE Wildlife's Facebook page or our website has information there as well. So those 2 resources would be great places to start.
Joe, thank you so much for your time today. As always, once again, that was Joe Gerken. He is our aquatics and fisheries specialist here at K-State, covering aquatic bugs and their importance in ponds. That concludes this Monday's programming. For Agriculture Today, I'm Samantha Bennett with the K-State Radio Network.